night, ladies. Now that you've made all the observations for me, I don't have to talk anymore, right? Marcia started me out. She gave me the thing on prayer. I'm like, we're good. All right. Well, my name is Sharon, and this is the second time I've spoken. I think it was Amy that told me I should be a kindergarten teacher because I bring props. So part of that is just because I used to give in-services, and in order to keep my staff awake, I did PowerPoint, and I always had visual things because you don't want people to fall asleep, right? So that's why I do props. It's to kind of focus us in, and you guys just ate this huge meal of mac and cheese, and so you're all going to be like really ready to go to sleep. So I don't want you to go to sleep. So that's why I kind of do this kind of thing. So tonight we're going to, that passage of Scripture, Marcia kept saying, what passage of Scripture are you doing? I'm like, I'm doing the whole book, guys, because there's just too much in Nehemiah to settle on just one passage. We will camp in 8 and 9 for a little while, but we're gonna go through the book of Nehemiah and just look at Nehemiah's life. And I don't know about you, but I became a great fan of Nehemiah this month as I read through the book of Nehemiah. And a lot of preachers in the 90s did sermons on Nehemiah because they were building new churches, and so they'd use Nehemiah as their example. But I didn't get that part at all. I just was impressed with his prayer, with his action, and so we're going to talk about that as we go through the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah was not a priest like Ezra, and we read about Ezra last month, or Zerubbabel. In fact, we see him doing many jobs, but always on his knees to accomplish God's work with a heart that was fully devoted to God. Have you ever thought that if you got paid for all the jobs that you do, you would be a millionaire? And when you have to split yourself between so many jobs, sometimes you feel like you're cheating on one over another. When I first got an email of my own, my kids were in high school, and I was constantly split between where my energies were directed. I was a wife, a mom, a business owner, and a nurse with many jobs. Mom many hats became my email, and even though my kids tell me this is way too long for an email, and I always have to spell it out, especially for men at the store when I'm writing it down, they never get it. I still use it because it reminds me of all the different things as women lots of times we are called to do. Well, in the book of Nehemiah, we are introduced to a remarkable man. We are going to travel through the whole book because it's such an incredible story of God's faithfulness and how he used Nehemiah in lots of different roles to accomplish his will. So we're going to start out in chapter 1, right at the beginning, and we're going to remind ourselves that the book of Ezra started with the first return of the captives 70 years after Jerusalem fell, and they were led by Zerubbabel. Then Ezra leads a group of returning captives 50 years after that, and Nehemiah will now return with about 2,000 people 15 years after Ezra. Nehemiah had been born in Babylon, in captivity. He'd never been to Jerusalem. In fact, when the story starts, he's in Susa, which is the king's summer palace, 1,000 miles away from Jerusalem. But he was a man who loved his country and his God. He has an important job, and it's a job with influence. It's not just important, he has influence. Only trusted people were allowed to have this job. He is the king's cupbearer, okay? So his job was to taste the king's wine before the king tasted it, so that if there was any poison in it, no more Nehemiah, but the king, long live the king, right? But God put him there because this job allowed him access to the king on a regular basis. And it also gave him opportunities to speak to the king. So in the opening book, Nehemiah hears from his brother who has come from Jerusalem. He asks about the remnant in Jerusalem, and he hears that they're in trouble. They're faltering because they have no defense. The walls of the city are in shambles.